Welcome to History 112, Lecture 48, The Rise of the Right. In many ways, the story of the rise of the right begins with the rise of the Sun Belt. Now, this is areas of the southeast, southwest, and above all, California, and these are collections of regions that emerged together in the post-war era. And by 1980, the Sun Belt's population began to exceed the industrial regions of the north and the east, and that's going to produce a shift in the political climate. And out of the Sun Belt, there's going to be a strong opposition to the growth of government and a general hatred towards regulations and restrictions. And overall, the politics of this region are going to be more and more hostile to the government over time. Now, what's also going to be going side by side with this is suburbanization is going to fuel the rise of the right because it's attracting people who want to flee from the problems and diversity of cities. One of the first big moments where we see the Sun Belt try to take on the government is the Sagebrush Rebellion. And that's going to be a mobilization of conservatives who are going to oppose environmental laws and restrictions on development, and they're going to get organized as a political movement and try to overturn these. And the rebellion, which is just simply a political one rather than an armed one, is going to portray the West as a victim of government control and try to revise laws based on freeing them from what they see as federal oppression. Now, one of the other major contributing factors to the rise of the right was that the United States experienced a major religious revival in the 1970s. Now, in some cases, this new religious enthusiasm found its expression in the rise of cults and the rise of other less accepted faiths like the Church of Scientology or the Unification Church of the Reverend Sun Myung Moon or even the People's Temple. But far more important than that was the revival of evangelical Christianity, and more than 70 million Americans are going to describe themselves as born-again Christians, and as a result, more Christians begin to operate businesses and schools that cater towards the born again community, and they're also going to begin to produce entertainment that's also geared towards those sets of values. Now, while Jimmy Carter himself was an evangelical Christian, and he believed that formed the basis for a commitment to racial and economic justice and world peace, most of the country did not regard Carter as being very successful and kind of pushed him and his leadership to the side. Now, this is going to lead to some other movements emerging, and many evangelicals in particular are going to fear different movements throughout the country, and one of the major ones they target is feminism, and this is going to lead to a movement called the Moral Majority. And the Moral Majority, as well as the Christian Coalition, who also form around the same time, are going to oppose federal interference in local affairs, denounce abortion, divorce, feminism, homosexuality, and they're going to support what they see as a strong American posture in world politics. Now, while all these significant factors were in play, we need to back up and think about where the new right came from. Now, it takes shape after the election of 1964, where Barry Goldwater suffers a major defeat. And the new right is a diverse, powerful movement that enjoys a lot of rapid growth during the 1970s and 80s for these factors we just discussed. But conservative campaigns for years have been less well-funded and less organized than those of their rivals. So essentially, while there was this mass movement in the country, it was not organized, it was not well-led, and it was not being very successful in national politics. However, during the 1970s, the new right is going to get organized, and during this time period, there's a lot of think tanks, consulting firms, lobbyists, foundations, scholarly centers, and so on, all beginning to form. And what is going to happen is they're going to align around Ronald Reagan. But that was not something that was possible until people like Nixon and Gerald Ford destroyed the equilibrium of national politics. Now, Reagan is going to begin his career by winning 2 terms as governor of California, and he's going to ride in the support of wealthy conservatives, and that's going to give him a more visible platform to promote his various ideas, and that's going to give him the ability to launch onto a national stage in the election of 1980. Now, as Reagan is emerging as a leader, the new right is able to hook on to a viable and explosive issue, and that is taxes. Now, in California, this is going to be where the tax revolt really begins, as it begins with something called Prop 13, and it's a citizens' tax revolt by using the referendum system in that state. And the way this works is if you get enough signatures for a proposal, then the state of California must put it on a ballot at the next election, allow people to vote on it, and if it passes, it becomes law. And Prop 13, what it did was it rolled back property taxes significantly. Instead of paying property taxes based on the value of your home today, you pay property taxes based on the value it was listed at when you purchased it. So what this means is for people who have had their homes for 30 years and seen the property values go up and up and up, who can no longer afford those property taxes, this rolled them back to a manageable level. Now, that's going to cause a lot of problems in the state of California in the long run, but in the short term it's very popular because people are using this issue of rising property values and the fact that it's causing people to lose their homes as a way to rally the conservative cause there. Now, once The tax revolt begins. This helps the conservative movement really solve its biggest problems in that they could not get unified. Now they have something that unifies them, and they're able to go after taxes in general, and then they are able to leverage that into moving against some of the most expensive programs like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and so on. Now, what they are going to do out of all of this, through things like Prop 13 and similar initiatives, is members of the right are going to find the best way to discredit the government is going to be attacking taxes, not attacking the specific programs. When the election of 1980 rolls around, this was a key moment for the conservative movement because there were a number of issues they could latch onto. There was the Iranian hostage crisis and the weak economy, neither of which have been dealt with effectively by Carter. There was hostility towards big government and a call for a more conservative Supreme Court. And in addition, Jimmy Carter himself is in serious political trouble. His popularity was the lowest of any president so far, and he faced a serious challenge from Ted Kennedy for the Democratic Party nomination that came down to the vote at the Democratic National Convention that year. So Ronald Reagan emerges as a Republican candidate, and he is going to talk about the excesses of the federal government, and he is going to link his campaign very strongly to the tax revolt, and he's going to promise substantial tax cuts. His tax cuts are now almost an article of faith for most modern Republicans. However, Reagan is in fact during his presidency going to raise taxes 8 separate times, and according to some definitions, the president who raised taxes the most is in fact Ronald Reagan, but he's going to pitch himself as the tax-cutting president. Now, on election day in 1980, Reagan is going to ride those promises of tax cuts right into the White House, taking 51% of the vote versus 41% for Jimmy Carter. And the Republican Party is also going to importantly win control of the Senate for the first time since 1952. Now, while the popular vote was only split by 10 points, we should realize what this looks like on an electoral map, and that's the map that actually counts. 489 electoral votes went to Ronald Reagan because he possessed the majority in those states, where only 49% went to Jimmy Carter. So what we can see is we have a very clear landslide in favor of the Republican candidate in 1980. So what's the big idea here? Well, ultimately it comes down to this. The rise of the right is all about the election of 1980 because that's where conservatives get organized, and Reagan is going to go ahead and take advantage of how deeply unpopular Carter is and the promise of tax cuts and building on things like the tax rebellion in California, and going to go ahead and sweep his way all the way into the White House, and he is going to be seen by his party as being a highly successful two-term president. See you in the next lecture.